Hey everybody, and welcome back to Korb Stat Chat. I'm sorry that it's been a little bit since I had my last video, but apparently it snowed on the East Coast a little bit. I mean, we got like 34 inches, and drifting and ice, and it was crazy. So it's been a little bit since I've put out my last video, which was talking about how to create random samples. And what we're going to do is we're going to expand our ideas here and start including more than just simple random sample. We're including the entire population. What we're going to do is talk about 5 different sampling techniques that we can use to arrive at our sample space. So hopefully this video is going to be helpful. Remember to like and subscribe after you watched. It's going to be a long video, but we go through a lot of content, so stick with it. You can do it. Thanks for watching.
All right, so sampling techniques. Here are the 5 that we're going to be discussing within the beginning of this course. And we're going to use these when we start getting into statistical studies later on as well. But sampling techniques, this is how we're going to arrive at our sample space of who we're giving a survey to, or who we're observing, or maybe just the experiment individuals, right, or the variables. So sampling techniques, starting off with the easy one, this is simple random sampling. This is the one we've been doing the whole time. We've been doing simple random sampling with the calculator, with the number table, as long as you assign a number to everybody or every individual within the statistical study, as long as you assign them a number, and then using a random number table or using the randint function on the calculator, we can come up with a simple random sample for the entire population. That's the key word here, entire population. Now the reason that we don't use this technique all the time, because this one is by far the most beneficial. It gives us truly, well, as close to random as we can get. But the reason we don't do this is because of time, money, resources, and so on. Because we can't survey the entire population of the United States. We can't give out 300 million plus surveys to everybody, or even include everybody. And we'll talk about undercoverage later on in sample frame as we come to a close. But just know that this one is the best to get the most accurate representation of the entire population, but it's the one that's least used because it's not easy to use and it's not cheap, right? And that's what it ultimately comes down to, is money. So let's move on. Let's talk about a couple other sampling techniques. I'll give you some examples, and then we'll go from there. Next one is going to be stratified sampling. Stratified sampling. Now, stratified and cluster sampling, which are 2 different sample techniques, they're going to look very similar, but they're just sort of reversed of one another. I'll explain as we get through. So we're going to divide the entire population into distinct subgroups called strata. So we break down the population into strata, and strata are based on specific characteristics: age, income, education level, and any other characteristic that you can think of. Okay, men, women is a big category to use. You can use ages per se, so age ranges. So if we had teenagers from I don't know, 13 to 19, and then you have a next frame that's right over to the right of that. Those would all be the different strata. The strata are based on these specific characteristics, and then we're going to draw a random sample from each stratum. So we break it down into subcategories. So we're looking at chunks of data or individuals, and then we're going to draw random samples from each one, trying to keep it even, right? So we have the population, we break it down into smaller sections, and then we draw random samples from each section. All right, so that's stratified. Okay, here's what it looks like visually. So we have women and men. So these are our 2 strata, our women and men characteristic. And then I drew a random sample of 3 people from each one. 3 women, 3 men, and then that is my sample space. Here's what it also looks like. So say that the whole screen is my population, and I break it down into these 5 subgroups. I don't know what these subgroups are. It could be grades. It could be age ranges, whatsoever. And then from each subgroup, I pulled a random sample from each one to form my sample space that I'm going to be surveying, experimenting with, or just observing. So that's stratified sampling. Here's an example. So Governor Wolf wants to determine the state's opinion regarding school taxes. He divides the state into classes: low income, middle income, and upper income. So those are our strata, or stratum. He then takes a random sample of the households from each income class, because if we just surveyed everybody, that would include the entire population, and that would totally change what we're doing here. So we break it down into the different classes, and then we actually take a random sample from each one. So that would be a stratified sampling example. Let's talk about a sampling technique called systematic sampling. I think this one's by far the easiest one to remember. Think of a systematic approach. So we're doing the same process over and over again to get our sample space. So this looks a lot like our simple random sample, because we have to number all the members of the population, or all the individuals of the population sequentially. So this works really well with conveyor belt system. So if you're working in, say, I'm going to talk about Doritos here momentarily. And when we do that, we'll talk about how they come off the conveyor belt. We include every 5th one or every 12th one. So we're including every kth member of the population in the sample. So we're looking at the entire population until we reach a goal of, say, 100 items or 100 individuals in the sample space. So we're going every 5th one, starting with the 3rd one. So the starting point is random. How many we're counting is random. But it's systematic because we're counting every kth term. All right? So that would be systematic sampling. Here's what it looks like if you have an entire population in order, listed out sequentially. I'm taking every 3rd one to create my sample space, which is down below. That's systematic sampling. Here's an example, and I'm going to talk about a typo that I have in here. In order to estimate the percentage of defects in a recent batch of Cool Ranch Dorito chicken. Didn't know that they were making chicken now, but what happened was when I was creating this question, I was making Cool Ranch Dorito chicken casserole. Look it up. It'll change your life. Do it. Anyway, let's just go with chips instead. So Cool Ranch Dorito chips. A quality control manager from Frito-Lay selects every 9th bag, so there's the systematic approach to it, selects every 9th bag off the conveyor belt, starting with the 4th one, until she obtains a sample of 120 bags. So you have to have that end goal in mind, or you're just going to keep counting and counting and counting until you incorporate the entire population, and that defeats the purpose. So that's systematic sampling. Let's move on. So in sort of conjunction with stratified sampling, cluster sampling looks a little similar, but we're going to take a sample of the individual subgroups first and then include everybody in the subgroup. Okay, so we're going to divide the entire population. Backing up. We are going to divide the entire population into pre-existing segments or clusters. These are most likely geographic. Okay, so stratified was just characteristics. These are more geographic. So if we're talking about street names, those are already predetermined for us, but it's easy for us to find clusters of those. Or states is a good one. Or countries would be a good representation of clusters. The clusters are often geographic, and make a random selection of clusters. So instead of including all the subcategories, like we include all the strata, and then we take random samples, we're going to take a random sample of the clusters. So we're going to randomize which clusters we're taking, and then we're going to include every single member of each cluster into the sample. Okay, so there's actually 2 stages to cluster sampling. This is stage 1, where we include every member of each cluster in the sample. And we're going to stick with just stage 1. There is a stage 2 where you then take a random sample of each member of each cluster that you chose randomly. But we're just going to stick with stage 1 cluster sampling, which is where we're including every member of each cluster into the sample. This is what it looks like. So say that we have streets, and then we get down here to 3rd Avenue, and that's the one that we randomly choose. We're going to survey every single person on 3rd Avenue. All right? Or say that we were looking at states. We have 50 states, we randomly choose 5, and then we include everybody in the state in our study. That would be cluster sampling. Here's an example. If you're a fan of home improvement with Tim the Toolman Taylor, he wants to check out how his chain of 50 hardware stores are doing in the eyes of the customers. So he decides to select 5 stores at random. So we have these pre-designed stores. So we already have our clusters set up of 50 hardware stores. Or you can think of like Walmart. So we have 5,000 Walmarts across the nation. That's our cluster samples that we're going to be choosing from. He decides to select 5 stores at random and survey every customer from each of those stores, asking them to rate the quality of their experience. The good thing about this is that we could probably get a nice generalization of it, and it's a lot cheaper to do 5 stores rather than 50 stores worth of customers. So that's why we're doing cluster sampling in this case. Let's talk about the last sampling technique. There is one more after this, but it's sort of a hodgepodge of all these. But sampling techniques, convenience sampling. There's my convenience store. So create a sample by using data from the population members that are readily available. So this just means that you walk out your door, you need a survey, so you just give it to the first 100 people you see. Okay, you put it on your website, and hopefully somebody stumbles upon your website. That's convenient to you. Or another good example that I like to give is that Mr. Korb gave you 2 weeks to get an assignment done where you had to survey 100 people. But what did you do? You forgot, and Bill told you on the bus that you need to survey 100 people before third block. So what you do is you get off the bus, and of course, you take your time. No, you don't. What you do is you run right into the cafeteria and find the first 100 people that you can find because it's convenient because you forgot. So convenient sampling is probably the least reliable out of all these because there's no system to it. We're not breaking these down into stratum or into clusters. So probably least reliable is convenience sampling. Here's another example. Say that you're looking at download time on a certain website. So what they do is they send out this link to anybody who would like to take it. Anytime that you incorporate something where you ask people to, could you do this on your way out? Or if you ever go to a store and they say, please do our survey and you can be entered to win type thing. If you do that, that's convenient sampling because you're not really strategically trying to choose at random who is going to be included in the sample space. You're just hoping for the best because it's, again, convenient. Multi-stage sampling, pretty straightforward here. It uses a variety of sampling methods to create successfully smaller groups at each stage. The final sample consists of clusters. So all this means is that we're going to incorporate, say we're going to use simple random sampling, but we're only going to use it once we've determined the strata that we have. Okay, so we're going to push a lot of these things together, or we're going to throw in a systematic approach along with cluster sampling. And here's an example that sort of represents this. So a farmer divides his orchard into 50 subsections. Okay, so subsections being clusters, right? Randomly selects 5, so he has 5 clusters that he's using. So this is cluster sampling. And then he samples every 5th tree in each subsection. So right there it tells me it's going to be systematic. So he uses cluster sampling, and then he uses systematic sampling to get a smaller sample space that is somewhat random. All right, so 2 other definitions that you might want to recognize here before we close is a sampling frame is a list of individuals from which a sample is actually selected. So a sampling frame are the people that we're going to use in the sample that could be included in the sample. Undercoverage is when we omit somebody from the sample frame. So say that we're using individuals in the school, and then you take all the people on the absentee list and throw them out, that's omitting part of the population. Okay, so that would be undercoverage. We're not covering everybody in the population in that case. We don't give everybody an equal chance to figure it out. Okay, so hopefully this has been helpful. I know it's a longer video, but hopefully you've stuck through to the end. If you have any questions, let me know. Make sure to hashtag me at hashtag KorbStatChat, and we will call it a day. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.